Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I want to talk to you a little bit about what the anxious preoccupied initially falls for with the dismissive avoidant attachment style when they begin the relationship. Of course, there can be many different individual features based on the actual individual person, but there is a big subconscious comfort zone draw that tends to sort of reel the anxious preoccupied person into this relationship with their partner. And it's very common for in this anxious avoidant trap that it's often referred to as, that the anxious preoccupied feels very infatuated with a dismissive avoidant. And some of these key features that play a contributing role are: number one, there's this trait variety element that really kind of draws both parties to each other. So one of the things that's super interesting about trait variety is it's sort of this idea that we are drawn to people who express different traits than we do. And if you think about this biologically or from an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense, right? Because if you are trying to survive out in the world years and years and years and years ago, if you are really smart and you pair up with somebody who's really strong, you have a better chance of surviving together. So trait variety has a role in evolution, right? In biology. And so there's this natural drawing into people of, when you hear the term even opposites attract, it's like people who are expressing your repressed traits plays this really big role in this really big draw. So what you'll see from this dynamic is that the anxious preoccupied is so externally focused on their relationships to others, and the dismissive avoidant is very focused on maintaining their emotional bandwidth and sort of soothing the relationship to themselves and being okay. They're kind of focused on what they need and how they feel, and they're expressing different elements of themselves, and they're often at these different polarities. So there's this kind of mysterious infatuating sort of draw of interest and intrigue that tends to really pull anxious preoccupieds towards dismissive avoidance. There's also this dynamic of anxious preoccupieds really being drawn to their subconscious comfort zone, which plays another huge role in what really streamlines what we're attracted to as individuals. And so if you look closely, anxious preoccupieds in their upbringing have inconsistency, right? They have this fear of abandonment that's often triggered because of inconsistency in the parenting roles. And so this inconsistency, this engagement and then lack thereof, creates this impulse to feel anxiously attached. And it's very common for people to confuse their attachment style being activated with true attraction and real love, right? It's very easy to be oh, because I feel afraid of this person leaving or feel afraid of not having this person's approval, it must mean I really like them, when actually that can just be a person touching your wounds. So there can be a role of both of those things coming together. Of course, there's dismissive avoidance from the trait variety perspective, going back to that previous point, that are also, very logical, practical, grounded, well thought out. There's all these wonderful traits about every attachment style. And anxious preoccupied tend to be more, not always, but tend to be more emotionally based, valuing connection. They tend to be more charismatic, really drawn to social interactions, things like that. So there are these trait variety differences that often really draw them towards each other. But underneath that, there's also that element of the subconscious comfort zone, where APs, when they feel somebody pull away from them or dismiss them, it triggers their attachment style being activated, and they will often confuse that for attraction. And so they'll oh, I have to get this person's approval, or, oh, I have to get this person not to leave me. So there's a subconscious comfort zone there of, well, I have to seek this person's approval. I have to try to solve for this inconsistency or uncertainty that's here. And that dismissiveness that the DA sometimes portrays to their partner can also represent the subconscious comfort zone of the anxious preoccupied person dismissing themselves. Because APs at their roots, because that's been their conditioning to go through that inconsistency, and because that adaptation that was made from that is for the AP to become very externally focused on winning over others as their attachment strategy, what essentially takes place is the AP can go into their relationships, and they are constantly dismissing their own needs in favor of pleasing others, constantly dismissing their own feelings to try to make sure that everybody else feels okay, constantly dismissing their own boundaries to make sure that everybody else feels comfortable with what they want. And so when somebody else mirrors that pattern back, there's this secondary feature that really creates attraction, which can be that the person is treating you the way you treat yourself, and it feels familiar and comfortable. And so it's this big draw that can take place. And so in this relationship dynamic, it allows for each party to feel like there's this like trait variety component where they're expressing each other's differences. And to a certain degree, unmet needs, right? But underneath that, there's also this familiarity in that each person sort of represents how each individual treats themselves. So these tend to be this comfort zone for APs to yearn for love, to yearn for approval, to yearn for connection, to yearn for the sense of security and being valued and cared for by somebody who's not really able to give that to them. And there's also, it brings up this other topic of trauma reenactment. Maybe I'll create a second video about this as a whole, but trauma reenactment is often this like subconscious comfort zone where out of that we think, oh, we're going to solve it this time around. We're going to pair up with somebody who mirrored these early behaviors and components of situations from our past, and this time it'll be different. And I really believe that trauma reenactment is more driven by your subconscious comfort zone than anything else, because the subconscious wants familiarity. It associates familiarity with survival because you've still survived from what's familiar from the past. But there's a whole bunch of theories out there about trauma reenactment and how that may play a role in the way that we live life, but also in the way that we connect and relate to other people. So these tend to be some of the things that really like draw the AP into this relationship dynamic. And I'll do a flip side video for the dismissive avoidant. And if you want to actually take the time to go through and work through some of these things in yourself, I highly, highly, highly recommend do shadow work. Shadow work is so powerful. I have a whole shadow work course. You'll be able to get through it in 7 days. You can check it out for free for 7 days using the link below. And it goes through like how to change and recondition these parts of yourself so that you don't end up going back to things that are disempowering dynamics for you. And also, like, you know, every attachment style has beautiful things that they can bring to relationships, but also challenges that they bring to relationships, because the insecure attachment styles obviously have a history of attachment trauma. And in its own way, trauma can be contagious, right? Like, it's not contagious the way we think about it from like a germ theory perspective, but it's contagious from the perspective of like, it's so easy to pass on, right? And so what's unresolved within us, we often bring into our closest relationships with our partners, with children, with, you know, the generational trauma. Things are getting passed down when they're not reconditioned within ourselves. And what's really cool about shadow work is it will help you see exactly what you keep going back to and exactly why. And then the shadow work exercises that we have in this course actually bring in an element of reconditioning, which traditional shadow work doesn't necessarily. So that you can also come up with action steps and strategies to condition yourself away from repeating these things going forward in the future. And one other cool thing too is that by breaking these patterns within yourself, if you're also in a relationship dynamic with something that's not working for you, but you find yourself like dragging your feet to leave despite knowing something's not really working and you're putting in the effort and it's still not changing, doing some of this work from a shadow work plus reconditioning perspective will also help you build up that internal self-esteem so that you'll feel empowered to be like, okay, if something's really not working, I'm not going to continue this cycle of going back and back or staying in something when I'm really not getting my needs met. So I hope this makes sense. Thank you for watching. Thank you for taking the time to go through this. You can check out that shadow work course for free using the link below. And please subscribe to this channel if you're enjoying the content here. I'd really appreciate it. And I will see you in the next video.